They came in the dead of night, descending from the void with an arrogance carved from centuries of conquest. The fleets of the XLR Imperium, a civilization so vast it spanned entire star clusters, believed humanity would be just another forgotten footnote in their history of dominance. To them, we were primitive, fractured, and unworthy of true consideration. Their war doctrine was simple: overwhelm, eradicate, and move on. When the first invasion fleets arrived, humanity barely had time to understand what was happening before the first colonies fell. Massive dreadnoughts darkened the skies, their weapons burning entire cities to cinders within moments. Our warships, though valiant, crumbled under their superior firepower. Planet after planet was consumed by their relentless march, and it seemed inevitable we would become just another extinguished species, another dead world among the ruins of their empire. But the XLR had made one fatal mistake. They believed strength was measured only in numbers, in technology, in the size of one's fleet. They had no concept of what made humanity different, what made us dangerous in ways they could never understand. Because while they had spent millennia perfecting war, we had spent our entire existence perfecting something far more unpredictable, something they had never accounted for. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. The first sign that the war was changing came not from our military, but from the whispers that spread through the XLR ranks. Their soldiers began hesitating in battle, their commanders hesitated to push forward, and their once flawless strategies began unraveling at the seams. The XLR were not used to fighting an enemy that adapted faster than they could comprehend, an enemy that didn't just resist but learned, evolved, and struck back harder each time. It started with the first major counterattack. A single fleet, thought to be nothing more than a desperate remnant of humanity's once proud forces, launched a suicidal charge against an enemy battle group far superior in both numbers and firepower. By all logic, they should have been annihilated in minutes. But they weren't. The XLR soon discovered that their opponents weren't playing by the rules of conventional warfare. Their ships moved unpredictably, their tactics defied logic, and their forces fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. The battle, which should have ended in a decisive XLR victory, instead became a massacre, their massacre. Human forces struck with precision, exploiting weaknesses the invaders didn't even know they had. The Imperium's warships, once thought to be untouchable, were torn apart by attacks that seemed impossible to counter. The XLR, so confident in their own supremacy, found themselves on the losing side of a war they had started. But the true horror for the invaders wasn't just that they were losing battles. It was that they couldn't understand why. Their weapons, their technology, their strategies, none of it mattered. The humans were using something else, something that had no place on a battlefield of cold calculations and measured firepower. And the more they fought, the more they realized the terrifying truth. Humanity had a secret weapon, something no other species had ever wielded against them. And once it was unleashed, there would be no stopping it. They had come expecting to conquer. Instead, they had awakened something they could never hope to control. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the XLR felt something unfamiliar creeping into their ranks: uncertainty. They had crushed empires, reduced thriving civilizations to whispers in the void, and never once had they encountered an enemy they could not methodically dismantle. Yet, here they were, watching their fleets falter against an opponent they had dismissed as insignificant. Reports from the front lines were erratic, filled with gaps and inconsistencies, as if their own soldiers could not fully process what was happening. Entire squadrons would vanish without explanation. Battle plans that had never failed before collapsed in the face of something they could not predict. And worst of all, their own commanders, trained in the most rigid and disciplined strategies, were beginning to lose faith. Among those seeking answers was supreme strategist BlackHFY. Unlike many of his kind, he did not believe in blind arrogance. He had studied the histories of every species the Imperium had conquered, analyzing their strengths, their weaknesses, and the precise moment their spirits had broken. Yet, when he examined humanity, something did not align. Their technology was inferior. Their military structure was fractured. Even their numbers were nothing compared to the might of the Imperium. And yet, They were winning battles they had no right to win. Kareth replayed the recordings from previous engagements, scanning for anomalies. He saw human pilots maneuvering their ships in ways that defied traditional combat logic. He witnessed soldiers on the ground fighting with an unpredictability that no strategic model could account for. It was as if they thrived in chaos, as if uncertainty itself was their greatest weapon. But that alone did not explain the scale of their resistance. There was something else at work, something beneath the surface, and he needed to find out what it was before it was too late. The answer, however, was not one that could be found in battle reports or intercepted transmissions. It lay in the minds of those who had faced humanity firsthand. There were survivors, XLR soldiers who had fought and lived to tell the tale. They spoke of something beyond strategy, beyond conventional warfare. They described battles where their weapons failed not because of superior technology, but because of something unseen. One veteran, his voice shaking, described how his squad had engaged a small human resistance force on a desolate moon. By all calculations, they should have wiped them out in minutes. But the moment the fight began, the humans seemed to know what they were going to do before they even did it. The XLR's positioning was countered before they could even establish a foothold. Every maneuver they attempted was anticipated and crushed. And the humans they fought like they had nothing to lose. Like their very survival depended on taking as many of the enemy with them as possible. Kareth listened in silence, his mind working through the implications. He had encountered disciplined armies before. He had fought warriors who would rather die than surrender. But this was something else. This was not just tactical unpredictability. It was as if humanity itself refused to follow the patterns the Imperium had come to expect from war. As if their very nature was a variable the XLRI had never accounted for. And then there were the stranger reports. Whispers of human ships appearing where they shouldn't be. Of entire battalions vanishing only to strike in places thought to be secure. Of weapons sabotaged, of orders disrupted, of plans undone before they could even begin. It was as if the humans were fighting on an entirely different battlefield, one the Imperium did not even know existed. Kareth's instincts told him there was something deeper at play. But he was running out of time to understand it. The war was no longer a simple conquest. It was turning into something far more dangerous. Because the XLRI were beginning to realize that humanity was not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And they would do whatever it took to make sure of it. Kareth Val had always believed that war was a science, an equation that, when solved correctly, led to inevitable victory. But nothing about this war made sense anymore. No matter how many calculations he ran, no matter how many strategies he adjusted, humanity continued to slip through his grasp. Every countermeasure the Imperium deployed was met with an unforeseen complication. The more they tried to assert control, the more it felt like the war itself was being rewritten in real time. That was when the reports came in data that defied everything the XLRI had come to expect from a standard military campaign. Entire legions had gone silent overnight. Not defeated. Not destroyed. Just gone. XLRI forces deployed to secure key strongholds had simply ceased transmitting, their last recorded moments showing no signs of distress. No enemy warships in range. No hostile forces detected. And yet, the next morning, when backup forces arrived, they found nothing but abandoned outposts, empty battlefields, and the faint remnants of energy signatures that suggested something had been there, something powerful enough to erase entire battalions without a trace. Kareth knew humanity was responsible. But how? Their weapons were impressive, yes, but not to this degree. Even their most advanced stealth technology should have been incapable of evading XLRI surveillance networks. Yet, somehow, they were doing it. And the worst part, his own soldiers were beginning to fear what they couldn't understand. The Imperium had always relied on superiority not just in firepower, but in psychological dominance. They crushed hope before it could take root, made it clear that resistance was futile before an enemy could even think about fighting back. But humanity was different. They didn't just resist, they adapted, thrived in the face of overwhelming odds, and somehow, impossibly, began turning the tide of the war. And now, something was happening that no amount of calculations could explain. Kareth turned his attention to the captured transmissions from human command centers. His analysts had decrypted fragments of their communications, though much of it made little sense. The humans spoke in codes and references he could not decipher. But one word kept appearing over and over again, embedded in their most classified transmission. A word that, despite his extensive knowledge of enemy cultures, held no direct translation in XLRE language. It was spoken with reverence, with fear, with certainty. They called it Project Revenant. The voice was human, clipped and urgent, spoken by someone who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. They're not ready for it. They think they're fighting us, but they don't even realize what's coming. Then, silence. Kareth's mind raced. If humanity was working on something powerful enough to cause this much disruption, something that could not just defeat the Imperium's forces, but erase them entirely, then they had underestimated their enemy far more than he had feared. But there was one last mystery. Even among the few XLRE soldiers who had survived these strange disappearances, none could recall seeing any physical evidence of an attack. There were no signs of weapons fire, no shattered hulls, no lifeless bodies left behind. Just emptiness. Like they had been swallowed by something unseen. The Supreme Strategist was no longer certain if humanity was simply winning the war, or if they had unleashed something even they couldn't control. Kareth Val had seen the end of countless wars, but never like this. The battle reports no longer spoke of combat, but of silence. Entire XLRE fleets vanished, not in fire and destruction, but into an absence so complete it defied reason. Every attempt to re-establish contact failed. His generals whispered of forbidden technologies, of something beyond even the Imperium's understanding. The last transmission from a forward command center had contained only 2 words before the signal was lost. "It's awake." Kareth's tendrils curled in unease as he watched the final battle unfold from orbit. His flagship, the Vorak Thule, hovered above what should have been humanity's last stronghold. The XLRE had mobilized everything: thousands of warships, planetary incursion forces, siege battalions. This was supposed to be the moment where the war ended, where humanity's last defenses crumbled. Yet, against all logic, the battlefield below was eerily still. No human ships had appeared to intercept them. No defensive grids had powered up. It was as if the enemy had abandoned their own world, except his sensors detected life signatures, human forces still present. They were waiting. A sudden pulse rippled across space, a wave of energy that bypassed every known form of shielding. Kareth's sensors flickered, then failed entirely. The Vorak Thule's bridge plunged into chaos as systems overloaded, readings fluctuating wildly. Then, the comms came back online, but not with the usual distress calls or combat orders. Instead, a voice human, but something about it felt wrong. "You wanted to know what Project Revenant was?" Kareth's eyes narrowed. This wasn't an open broadcast. It was directed at him specifically. It wasn't a weapon. Not in the way you thought. The battlefield below shifted. The shadows cast by the ruins of humanity's last city began to move, stretching unnaturally, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. Then, with a soundless eruption, the ground split apart and something emerged. Not a ship. Not an army. A presence. Kareth's mind reeled as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. The energy signatures were impossible, fluctuating between the organic and the mechanical, between the real and the immaterial. It took form, shifting constantly, adapting, rewriting itself in real time. And then it spoke again, not through the comms but directly into the minds of every XLRE present. "You thought humanity was weak? That we were primitive. You never considered what happens when a species refuses to break." The XLRE fleet opened fire. Thousands of plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, and high-yield warheads rained down toward the anomaly. None of them reached their target. Space itself seemed to bend, swallowing the attacks, rendering them meaningless. The Revenant, whatever it truly was, continued to rise, and with it, the fabric of reality trembled. Kareth realized too late that this wasn't a battle. It was an extinction event. The Revenant was humanity's answer to conquest, not through war, but through something far worse. A final evolution, a transformation born from desperation and defiance. Every human lost in this war had not been erased. They had been absorbed, rewritten into something greater, something beyond mortality. And now, the XLR would face the same fate. Karth Val's final moments were not of pain, nor of fire, but of understanding. Humanity had not built a weapon. They had become one,